This conference will now be recorded.
So welcome everyone to the Veeam online webinar of the Veeam user group of Belgium, Luxembourg. First of all, we have some house rules for the session. So it will be recorded. It will be given in English so everyone can join, not only the people from Belgium. And at the end, there will be room for questions and answers. So if you have questions, put them aside. At the end, we will answer them. What is the content of this session? First of all, an introduction. We will introduce ourselves. Imagine a disaster at your server infrastructure. How can Veeam Replication be a solution? How it works? And what to do when a disaster occurs. And at the end, there will be a summary and some recommendations, and as promised, some time for Q&A. Let's introduce myself. I'm Nico Losgaard. I'm a senior consultant working at Orbit as a consultancy company. My main focus is on virtualization, backup, and disaster recovery. So for Veeam, I am from the beginning a legend. And together with Kristof, we form the VUG of the BeLux. Kristof?
Yeah. Also from my side, a warm welcome to this webinar. I am now the second year in a row Veeam Vanguard. I have my own company, Integri. We are a VESP partner. There are only two VESP partners in Belgium. We are proud one of them. And as Nico already mentioned, together with Nico, we are the VUG leaders for Belgium and Luxembourg.
All right, so imagine a disaster. Everyone in a company has a server infrastructure, and imagine that happens. Flood or a pipe, a water pipe that has been broken and your server infrastructure is not available anymore. Or fire catches in your server infrastructure. Or a plane crashes just on your building where your data is located. Not a good idea.
No, these are already very decent physical disasters, but we can also look into other types of disasters. Let's imagine a ransomware is also, it's really a disaster when you're faced with ransomware in your environment. So that can be also a type of disaster that occurs in your infrastructure. Maybe for some people who have to implement it, it can be a disaster. But data compliancy, it gives also challenges. Imagine your company gets taken over or must comply with some new rules in terms of RPO, RTO. These can generate also very large headaches if you need to be compliant with those new regulations. For example, NIS2 in Europe, it's something to think about. And last but not least, there are always system errors. It's still electronics, it's still software, it's still written by humans. An example over there can be the CrowdStrike event everybody knows, or recently an update on Windows 11 that took your Windows machines into an endless loop. This type of disasters can happen to your infrastructure, into your IT environments.
Absolutely. So imagine that one of those disasters occurs at your infrastructure. No problem, because we have implemented the 32110 rule. Everybody knows that. So what it means, in short, we have two backups. We have the production data. We have then two backups. So no problem. We have it on two different medias, for example, on disk and on tape. And we have one offsite copy, so we're safe because there is yet a backup on another side away from where your disaster occurs.
Yeah.
And it is also immutable or air-gapped, so if ransomware is being active, no problem. And we have implemented Sure Backup because an automated way to test if your backups are okay. What stuff?
Yeah, these are all real nice setups and examples to protect your data. But let me make some remarks on this because we are talking about backups. The backups if you refer to the disaster you described in the previous slide, maybe you have your backups, but your infrastructure is gone. The plane will hit more than only that one server rack. It will have a larger impact. So yeah, think about having infrastructure available, although you have your backups maybe on tape, maybe offsite. You must be able to restore them. When you want to restore them, it can take some time. If you are writing your backups to, for example, external S3 object storage, and you have not a big bandwidth, you need to download all those data back to your infrastructure. It will take time, and it will give you some challenges in RPU, of course. The business can have different wishes. The recovery point, okay, I take a backup every week on site, but I have to recover within an hour. Yeah, that gives challenges. The same for the RTO, especially in Belgium, we have asynchronous internet, the download and the upload. It's sometimes a real bottleneck to get back your hands on your data in a fast and decent way. And also in terms of SLAs, it can be that the business has some very specific SLAs that a backup is not sufficient. That can be the case. So backups, if we look into backups, we are talking about RPO, recovery point objective, and recovery time objective, the RTO, in matters of hours and days. But there is another solution, and since we are talking about VBR, the R is not only for recovery, but it's also for replication. So when we look to replication, I think we can achieve RPO and RTOs in a matter of minutes. And let's dive deeper into these topics of replication.
Yes, so Veeam Replication, as Kristof mentioned, how does it work? What is it? What is Veeam Replication? It's totally different than a backup. A backup is in a special format, but Veeam Replication creates an exact copy of the VM in a native hypervisor format on the target host. So it means if you are working with VMware, you are creating a copy in VMware itself. So it's in fact a copy of your VMDK file. VBR maintains this copy in sync with the source VM based on a schedule. So what we mentioned there before, if we can achieve that in a couple of minutes, if possible. It provides a minimum recovery time objective, as Kristof already mentioned, that is very important in case of a disaster. So it means that we can recover in this situation. We do a failover. We will mention it later in this session also. We do a failover in some minutes. That's impossible to do that with backups, because backups is okay, but when you have to restore, it takes minutes to hours to days, depending from your infrastructure, of course. Okay, VMs are in a ready to start state, has to be. It uses native snapshot capabilities. For backups, it also uses snapshot capabilities, but for the replication also. And if a disaster strikes and the production VM stops working properly, you can fail over to that replica. Important to know is that when you do that, you always have data loss. The time between the latest restore point you created and the time of your disaster, that time you can't recover, of course.
Yeah, I always like the instant recovery feature. It has nothing to do with the replicas, but even then, when you do instant recovery, you can have your production machine quite fast available again for the end users.
Correct.
But then you're facing the other challenge of moving your virtual machine from your backup repository to the final production repository, and maybe you also have some performance penalties.
Performance is the biggest issue.
And with replicas, you can avoid this type of problems. But there are some considerations and limitations, of course. There are some things to think about, and one of them is that the replication we can only use these days between VMware vSphere or Microsoft Hyper-V infrastructure. So that's something to think about. when you're thinking about setting up replicas between machines. For vSphere, these are the technical considerations and limitations, but the target host must support the same hardware version. I can imagine ESX5 and I replicate to ESX version 8 or vice versa. It will give some challenges. So we really think about the hardware version of the virtual machine. It has to be the same. It has to be supported. Also, one thing, you can use it or abuse it to convert or to migrate some templates. That's not possible. You cannot replicate templates from one environment to another one. And especially for Hyper-V, also there, keep an eye on the versions of the machines, but also from the hosts. They have to be at the same level or must be equal or later. Otherwise, you're not able to fail over in a decent, in an automated way, as it was mentioned in this feature in this product. Okay, so yeah, replication. What do we need? And I think it's important to say we have two types of replication. We have on-site replication, where we replicate a machine in the same environment, in the same geographic location, more or less. But we also have off-site replication, and then we are putting a machine outside or at another geographic location. We put it outside. It is further away from our production site. And depending on the scenario, you can also use the one accelerators when you have a small link between those two sites. So when we talk about requirements, what do we need? Of course, we need a source backup proxy. He is the data mover. He does the heavy lifting of the data. You can have your production source or your production data store as a source, but you can also replicate from backup repositories. We come back to that in more detail later on. Yep. So there you have some options. You put it into a WAN accelerator if needed, if you have constraints on bandwidth limitations. And then on the other side, of course, we have the WAN accelerator if it's used. We also have there the target proxy, who does the decompression and who will do the reformatting to the final VMware or Hyper-V file format. And we have the target host. In this example, it's just an ESXi host that receives the replicas. And you see the virtual machines are ready to be booted at that location. So yeah, that's more or less the infrastructure we need.
All right, so how does it work? First of all, as Kristof also already mentioned, we have a source host and a target host. So on the source host, there are the production VMs, and on the target host, there are running the standby VMs that are offline, of course. So what happens? There are jobs, replication jobs. We will mention it later in the session, and those are scheduled. And on that scheduled time, it will trigger the backup. Those are configured on the backup server. So let's assume in this situation, it's an on-site replication because the backup server needs to be at the location of the DR site. But there is no really DR site over here because it's all on-site. So the backup server retrieves the settings from the configuration database of the job. And what does it do? It will create a VM snapshot on the source host for that VM that will be replicated, and that will be transferred using the source backup proxy, as Kristof also mentioned. And the backup repository, it is needed to put on the metadata for those replication, because it is also using CBT, the change block tracking, to know what has been changed from the last restore point. And then that data is being transferred to the target proxy that is located preferably as close as possible to the target host. And then that's finished. When that's finished, that VM snapshot on the source host will be eliminated, just like we are using a backup copy of a backup job.
Okay.
So what is happening? So we have a replication chain. Everybody knows normally the backup chain. The backup chain consists of a full backup file and some incrementals. That's totally different than a replication chain. We have some kind of tree. And you see that on the at the above screenshot? We see the VMware solution, and below we see the Hyper-V solution, and we see a tree of all the snapshots. So those snapshots that are ready are in fact restore points. So those are points where you can restore to. Those are using, of course, the snapshots. And
so you can refer to any restore
Absolutely.
Point that's available.
You define in your job how many restore points you want, and then you see the number of available snapshots and checkpoints. Something else you can do is replica seeding and mapping. Both of those solutions are used to reduce the amount of traffic during the first session. Kristof mentioned before that we can also use, for example, offsite replication. Between those two sites, there is a very small bandwidth. And let's assume that we want to replicate a file server of several terabytes. The first time, all the data, all the blocks needs to be transferred from the production side to the DR side, and it would take, for example, weeks. That is not, it's not a good idea to do that. So there is a solution, seeding. So what can you do about that? We first take a backup at the production site to, let's say, a removable USB disk. One time, it's creating a full backup file. Then we transport that USB disk to the target, to the DR side. We attach it to some kind of physical server. And then at the first run of that replication job, we refer it to seeding. So what will happen? It will take that backup the first time, the first run of that job, as being the data. So it's not pulled away from the production, but it's pulled from that USB disk. Afterwards, after the first run, it's being a normal incremental replication job. Mapping is an alternative when you, for example, have copied the VMDK file, for example, on your, you do an export or so on your USB disk and didn't use a backup. So it's already in the native format of the hypervisor. Another thing you can do is a replica from a backup. Let's assume that you have indeed, again, a small bandwidth between the production side and the DR side, and you have implemented the 32110 rule, and you want to have a backup copy offsite. So you are doing a backup copy from the production side towards the DR side, and you also want to implement replication from the production side to the DR side. So in fact, you are transferring 2 times for the same VM, one time in a native
and one for a replica.
Indeed, so that's a bit stupid. Not stupid. If you have enough bandwidth, that's no problem. You do that.
It's not optimal.
But if it is limited and you can't do it within your maintenance, within your backup window, it's impossible. And then you could do that. You could set it up that your replication job is just referring to your backups that is already being copied. So it needs to be transferred just one time. It's not pulling the data from your production, but from the backup copy that is already assigned at your DR site. And that's, in fact, being used for every job.
Yeah, I really like the methodology and the feature of the replica seeding to get your 4 terabyte huge file server at a decent time at the DR site. Instead of waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks and having some network interruptions and start all over again. That's really, really nice. There are some other nice to have and nice to know advanced options in replicas. We already talked about the replica seeding, and some screenshots are shown here. You can also do the mapping, as Nico already mentioned. Maybe there is already a version, an older version of that machine that then the replica will check, okay, which blocks do I need, and only the necessary blocks to be in the same status, to be at the same level of our production will be transferred over. So everything has to do with optimization over small links, WAN links, or bandwidth issues. Another thing that's important, because the plane is still lying on the building now, so the network is down, I guess, most of the time. IPs and network mapping, because you have your range at your production site. Maybe you have another range, a complete other range at your DR site. How do we cope with this? We try to set up some minimal infrastructure at our primary sites to get some connectivity to our DR site. But there is also a feature of network remapping. When you do a failover with the VBR product, you can also instruct that the virtual machine has to go a network remapping. So the machine stays available with its original IP it had in the main site, in which it had in the production site. Very nice feature over there. And as Nico already mentioned, the source can be your production storage or can be backup files. A remark I always make is, okay, when you do your source from a production storage, you have double impact on your production environment. I want to have a backup, so I take a snapshot of my production, and then maybe 5 minutes later I want to take a replica. I take another snapshot of my production environment. If your storage, if you have problems with performance over there, it can be an impact.
It has to be avoided then.
It has to be avoided. And then you can say, okay, I want to replicate from my backup files. But keep in mind, your replica will be the latest restore point, which is available in your backup repository. So things to think about when you're setting this up. Yeah, I think that will be more or less it about the most important options. There are a lot of them. As I already mentioned here in the replication job, you can define on which folder you want to have your VM replicated, on which data store you want it. You can assign a resource pool, all those things which are very familiar, both in Hyper-V, both in vCenter, ESXi. You can define. This is a screenshot of the network mapping, when you can say, I have a total different network, but I want to map it. And I can even do the re-IP. This is the re-IP. I can say I want to masquerade my IPs and to make my machine available at the original IP.
Interesting to know for that latest, Kristof, that is available for the Windows machines.
Yeah. It's only available for Windows.
The registry key that he's changing the IP address, it's not available for.
But Veeam users wouldn't be Veeam users. If you go on GitHub, you will find some nice Linux scripts which will do exactly the same. They're not built in. You have to validate them to check them if they are compliant and working in your environment. You can do something with scripting on Linux machines. It's built in for Windows. This is the replica, and you saw in the previous screens the tree with all the snapshots, with all the restore points. This is the screen where you define how many restore points you want to keep, and you can go into any point in time if you want to do a failover to this replicated machine. Of course, the optimization goes quite deep in the environment. So some swap files, empty blocks are not taken into account when you do your transfer of your data. And then the data transfer, I started with it, I will end with it. You can have a direct connection, but you can also use WAN accelerators if you are really tight on bandwidth, especially when you go in an offsite replication environment. WAN accelerators can be very beneficial. Good. The seeding itself, we talked about it earlier, so I can map a replica. This is the seeding where I say, okay, I have already a machine available. Just start calculating the change blocks and only transfer the change blocks over the network to have my replica at the same level as my production. Another thing is, of course, the guest processing. All those things are known from the local taking a backup, that you have your machine in a much as possible consistent state when you put it over, and you can be sure when you press it on, when you start it, it's working and the application is shut down in a decent state and will start in a decent state as well. Replication jobs, you can do it manually, of course, but you can also schedule it once a week, every day, every 15 minutes, depending on bandwidth, depending on business requirements, depending on available storage, things like that. has to be taken into account when you set up your replication schema.
Just be aware not to set it too low, because you're then always working on your production VM in a snapshot mode, which is not recommended.
No. And then we also have CDP, of course, if you want to get a very, very low replication between or very high requirements on timings. So yeah, everything is now set up, and now I think it's time for some failover.
Yes, indeed, Kristof. Yeah, the mouse is not functioning. It seems to be. Okay.
Yes.
So using Veeam Replication when a disaster occurs. Let's assume that a real disaster happened to your infrastructure. Then you need to perform a failover. You need to do that manually when the disaster strikes your production site. And a failover is in fact switching from the VM on the source host to its replica on the DR site. So Veeam assumes that your VM on the source host is not available anymore. You shift all your processes to that replica. It's an intermediate step that needs to be finalized. So it means that, for example, you have then done a failover from your production site to the DR site because your hardware was corrupted or so, was shut down and you couldn't solve it. And after a while, it is solved. HP or Dell or whatever vendor came by and solved the issue.
Replace the power.
Indeed. Then you could go back again. So as you see in the screen, you see that there will be created a snapshot. So you can always go back if you want to. A permanent failover means that you are in a situation where you will never go back again, because let's assume the plane crashes on your infrastructure. All your infrastructure is, of course, broken. It will not be repairable anymore. Then you will go to permanent failover when it is recommended in this scenario, when it are located in the same site or nearly equal in terms of resources. For example, it can be that in your DR site, you have a limited infrastructure available because it costs, of course, money, and normally it's just running passive VMs in a standby mode, so not really consuming any real memory and CPU performance. It could be that it is just limited. So if it is limited, it could be that you want to replace after disaster with real power infrastructure, and then you won't do a permanent failover, but you go to the next option, and then it's an undo, where you can say, no, that's in fact when you go back. So for example, in the first scenario, when you have resolved the issue with the hardware again, then it could be that for, let's assume at 10 o'clock there is a disaster. Your hardware fails and you do a failover at 12 o'clock or so, so you lose a gap of 2 hours, and that data is gone. Afterwards, you can do an undo because your hardware is again resolved, and you want to go further with the state you left when disaster occurs, and not with the.
You forget all your changes.
Yeah, it's all gone. You could do that in a short period of time. After days, you won't do that anymore because a lot of people, employees, are just working again with your databases, and a lot of new data is again added to your infrastructure, of course.
Yeah,
Failback is another option, Kristof.
If you can fail over, you can always fail back as well. It's back as Nico mentioned, back to the replica, from the replica. So we run a small amount of time, some time on the replica, and now we want to go back to the source VM. The issue was resolved. Sometimes, even I sometimes see environments which go to replicas and do failovers if they want to have maintenance firmware updates at their source infrastructure. within the same environment, they do replica, they fail over in a planned way, they do the firmware upgrades, and then they fail back. And this is the real scenario for that. So you shift all your processes back from the to the source VM, but also the changes that took place at the replica, they are synchronized back to the source VM. So no data was lost. They took all the changes, and it works with, of course, with snapshots and deltas, and then it fails back. But all the changes are kept. If the source host is not available, again, our plane, we need to source some new hardware. We can recover a VM, and we can revert, and we can switch to it. And then all the changes which are necessary to build up to the latest version, to the latest running stage of that replicated machine, are sent back to our original site. Yeah, they are sent back to the environment, but keep in mind they are not published yet. So they are there, they are sitting there, and they are waiting for you to eitherwise do it automatically or manually start the failback process. Why do we do this? Yeah, you want to have some control of it. When you do a failback to the environment, maybe you want to check if all my applications are running, is my database available, is everything coming up, are all my services starting? If that's not the case, you can say, yeah, this was a nice try, but let's go back to our replica and do some further deep dive investigation on this machine, on this environment to fix it decently. So yeah, you can use a quick failback. But I would suggest only do this when you have operating system.
Absolutely,
yeah, that's an important one. Yeah, and it can be done automatically, scheduled, or manually. If you have the time, and I like to be in the GUI of VBR, so I do it manually. Then I can click something. But then you have full control, and you know exactly what is going to happen with my machine. Because when you are in a big environment, you see several replicas, some are failed over, some are failed back. It can be a mess, and you want to have a good overview what is running in production where, because when I say, okay, this machine can be decommissioned and there is still a VM running on, I have some bigger problems than this. So that's about the failback. It looks like this, failback to production. There is a nice description on it, what it really does. You select your machines. You want to fail back one or multiple of them, and you say, okay, you can specify or define a specified location. You can fail back to the original location. It's really a nice wizard. It's very good documented, so it's a very straightforward procedure to perform the failback. This is the scheduled way, but I personally do it manually. Yeah. That I have full control. I know exactly what is happening. When you do the failback, and you say, okay, my machine has failed back. I check my applications, everything is running. I still have to do one last step, and that is the failback commit. Then I say, okay, this is my checker flag. Now everything is back in the production. We don't need the replica anymore. We will start using it in the future again as a replica, again as a safeguard. But now we are 100% confident that everything can run again in the production. So that's the failback. If something fails in your production, you replicated your data back to your production, you booted it, and it says, yeah, it's not booting, or there is a problem with an application. Even there, you can do an undo of the failback. A lot of do's and undos in this presentation, but you can still go back. It's really a lifesaver when something you synchronized everything, you check it, it's not working, I still have issues, corrupt blocks, I don't know, whatever. I can always go back to minimize the impact to my production for my employees, that they still can be reconnected to the replica where we were running originally. You can do it here in the GUI, and then it works, of course, everything here works with the snapshots. It is the failback protective snapshot that is used for that.
Yes, and next to the failover, you have also a planned failover. What does it do? You shift then all the processes from the source VM to its replica, but you can do that in a planned way. So for example, you can do it proactively when you know, for example, that you will have downtime on your production site and you want to switch over to your DR site for a certain time. What is different between a failover and a planned failover? That is, it is taking a snapshot before it is going to perform the switchover. It is taking a snapshot to sync it the both ways. Afterwards, it is turning off the VM on the production side. It is not doing that in a real failover, because in a real failover, it assumes that your VM is not indeed. It's not available anymore, but over here, everything is available. So it is turning off that VM. It is taking again a snapshot. So there is no data loss. So you have both VMs are totally in sync, and afterwards, when that is finished, it is booting the VM on the DR side. So in fact, you have to know if you are performing a planned failover, you have to do it in the maintenance window, and because there will be downtime for a VM, and it depends, of course, on your performance of your infrastructure, how fast it will be done.
Yeah, we had an interesting use case on that. We had a customer who was outphasing his old hardware. It was still working 100%, but they installed new hardware and they want to do the migration themselves.
Okay.
So we set up replicas. We showed them and we said, okay, at your own pace, at your own speed, every night take a machine, do a planned failover, and he was migrating his machines at his own pace.
The impact is then
and the
very
impact
low.
was minimal for that customer.
Absolutely. Good scenario. So as mentioned before, it is helpful when you know when the source VM is about to go offline and you proactively switch the workload to the replica. The source VM is being shut down automatically, like I mentioned. And the VM must, of course, be in a ready state. Another option are failover plans. What is a failover plan? In a failover plan, you define the order on the VMs you want to replicate in which they need to be spinned up. And you can also define an interval in seconds, how many time it needs to be wait before the other VM is going down. And it's also very useful in the case of a disaster. A lot of stress is available at that time. And when you have created, because it has to be created in advance, when you have created them, okay, then you can just do one click on the failover plan and it's just doing everything for you. You do not have to click on every VM yourself manually to start it up.
So we know it's first my database server, then my front-end application server, everything in the correct way.
When you define that already, it's more convenient to perform a failover than doing everything manually.
Okay.
Then we have a summary and some recommendations. Of course, secure your data against disasters. So not only backups, but if backups are not sufficient enough regarding the RPO and RTO, just implement Veeam Replication, like we discussed over here. Perform at least yearly a disaster recovery test and simulate some certain scenario. For example, all your infrastructure is not available anymore. Simulate that. What needs to be done?
Also with NIS2, you have to think about
it. Absolutely. Yeah. More and more customers now are aware of it because of that it needs to be implemented. And update also your the disaster recovery plan after performing a DR test, because after a DR test, you see always certain things, because you have a dynamically environment and everything is changing, and rarely that it is statically. Yes, indeed. So it can be that there are some issues evolved that were not available yet last year in your disaster recovery test. So you have to define every stakeholders, of course, the contact details. For example, the mobile phone of some important employee has been changed. It needs to be in that DR plan, because that DR plan is your thing you need, and in case of a disaster, And as I mentioned already before, there's a lot of stress at that time. When you have something you can count on, that's a real effort. As I mentioned also, if you are changing a lot on your infrastructure, for example, you are renewing your infrastructure, don't wait a year before doing a disaster recovery test, and do it soon after it.
Should be part of the change.
Absolutely, in fact, yes. And if you have no extra DR site available, you don't have it, you can go to your partner and ask for a disaster recovery as a service. For example, Veeam Cloud Connect can not only be a solution for a backup as a service, but also for DR as a service. If minutes are not sufficient for an RPO and you need seconds, then you could implement continuous data protection of Veeam, but it's only available at this time for VMware, not for Hyper-V yet. We don't know if it comes, but you never know. And there is also another product from Veeam, Recovery Orchestrator, where you have much more capabilities, not from the VPR itself only, and you have dynamic automatic documentations like your more or less your DR tests reports and your DR plan.
Yeah, you can do a lot of more scripting and testing and things like that with VRO. Yeah.
So we are at the end, Kristof.
The plane is still on the building. We are running on our replicas, but maybe there are some questions. I already saw a very interesting remark of Dries, and he says, and it's really true, Dries, keep in mind there is a snapshot limit of 28 snapshots on VMware. If you are already, a system admin is already taking a snapshot for testing something, and then you are still throwing some replicas and some snapshots on it, keep in mind this is really a limit. Keep your snapshots absolutely to an absolute minimum, because when you want to merge those snapshots into your production, it's quite intensive and quite hard for your underlying system.
Absolutely, and for Hyper-V there is also a limit. It's bigger than 28. I don't know by head how many it is, but it's larger. But in fact, indeed, 28 is already a lot.
Yeah. Maybe there are other questions. Feel free to drop them in.
You can unmute yourself.
Or unmute and let us know.
No problem. We're here for you.
I think everything is clear. There are no questions.
That is impossible, Kristof.
Not with 32 slides on replicas. Check the help center if you need more information on the replicas. It's really worth getting your hands into it and check it. If you're not experimented with it yet, please do so. It's nice technology.
Absolutely.
And it will give you a lot less stress to fail over or to make machines, high available machines you need very fast.
Yes, the recording of the presentation will be available. Sophia will set it available, no problem.
Mathieu asked for it, so it will be posted as soon as the recording is finished.
Yes, you see, in 1 or 2 weeks.
And it will be on YouTube, so I should say a like and subscribe, and maybe we come back with another episode afterwards. If there are no further questions, I only have one slide left. First of all, a big thank you of attending this webinar. But one more thing, as some people tend to say, at December 12th, 24th, it's a nice day, by the way, we should do something with it. We have our next Veeam user group, Belgium, Luxembourg, in-person event. So everybody's invited to join us. This year, it will be in Aalst at the offices of Arrow. It will be mid-December, so maybe there will be some Christmas drinks, some Christmas market involved. If you have some questions, if you have some topics, feel free to reach out to let us know. We still have some slots free to touch on specific topics if you want to know something more. If you don't have any further questions, thank you once again for attending, and see you soon.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.